Welcome to our podcast, SafeR Journeys. Our podcast is dedicated to raising children, ending violence, and ending oppression. We are your hosts. I am Heather, one of the preventionists here at Safe Journeys in Streator, Illinois.
And I am Melissa, the Director of Community Engagement and the Prevention Programming with Heather in Safe Journeys. And today's topic is Erin's Law. And let me tell you, we have something in store for you. We just got off a call with Erin Merryn of Erin's Law. I have to completely be honest with you, we're fangirls. Yes.
Erin's Law is what allows us to go into the K through 12 classrooms and teach child abuse prevention. So, first of all, that's a huge exciting thing. But she is doing amazing work throughout the country and throughout the world, which we learn about today on our interview with her.
I'll save that little surprise for you there, because when we found out, we were so excited for the work she's doing and for the countries that she's working with in their departments of education. So
I'm going to say this now, but we're probably going to put the interview up on YouTube. And you will see our eyes bug out of our heads with excitement when she shares certain things.
Yes, or anything she says, we're nodding our heads and smiling.
I know.
And you'll see me smile when she's saying some things that are kind of disturbing. However, I was smiling because I was so proud of her persistence in a lot of cases.
Yes, I was thinking that too. I was like, dang. This girl is persistent.
Yes.
And I love it.
Yes. Particularly, you're going to hear her talk about getting Erin's Law passed in New York. And listen for her persistence through that story and through her own stories of abuse and disclosure. I was just so dang inspired, and she's so courageous, and we all just look up to her.
I agreed. She's in my mind, and I told my partner this, and he's like, she's not a rock star. I'm like, no, she's a rock star in our world. I don't think you understand how huge she is.
Yes.
And it was a fight for me to keep my cool and not squeal. Every time she said something that I was like, yes. It's great.
Before we go into our recorded interview with Erin, I wanted to give a trigger warning. We do talk about child sexual abuse in this episode.
Quite a bit.
Yes, and grooming in particular, and especially child sexual abuse in the family. Also coaches and educators and different family members, whether that's a cousin or an uncle. And so I just wanted to give that trigger warning that content is here.
Yep, it's a little bit more explicit than maybe some of our previous episodes. So just want to prepare everyone.
Yes.
Cool. So we recorded that interview on March 15th. And you'll probably be hearing it a little bit later. Just wanted to let you know, so you weren't like, oh, that was weird. It sounded like they were talking about things from a month ago or whatever. And let me give you a quick bio here on Erin and Erin's Law. So Erin Merryn is a childhood sexual abuse survivor. She now serves as an educator, as a public speaker, and an advocate, protecting children across the country, and today we learned across the world, with Erin's Law. So Erin's Law is a public school mandate, and it requires K through 12 students to receive developmentally appropriate sexual abuse prevention. I also want to highlight, this is not sex ed. This is just preventative strategies for kids to keep themselves safe from abuse. Oftentimes you'll hear us call it body safety. I think Erin also refers to it as body safety. In addition to her full schedule of advocating for young people, she authored 5 books, 3 of which are in the realm of sexual abuse, childhood abuse, surviving memoir type things. 2 of them are books about her cats, which I may or may not have looked through before. And even cooler, did you know she was like Person of the Year or Woman of the Year for 2 different organizations. One was People Magazine and the other was Glamour.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So things got a whole lot more glamorous. And I actually read that about her right before we talked to her. And I was like, oh no, because I get starstruck pretty easily. And I was like, oh God, I better talk in this thing.
You did not seem starstruck, so that was fine.
Well, she was so down to earth. And
it felt like we were having coffee with a friend, didn't it?
Yeah. And you're going to notice, like, Erin is so on point with her speaking. She is such an amazing public speaker.
Yeah, well, she's spoken. Cool. Erin wouldn't make that mistake, though. I'm just kidding. She's spoken to such large groups and all over the place. So, yeah. We obviously think she's amazing.
Yes.
As we fangirl out. So take a listen to the interview. You'll hear us come back and reflect a little bit about that afterwards. But for now, please enjoy our interview with Erin Merryn. Well, we are really excited that we have Erin Merryn, right, of Erin's Law, here with us today. And we're super, super excited. I was just telling Erin and Melissa I was fangirling out. I'm so excited to have Erin on today. And I also have to tell you, Erin, before I knew who you were, anything about sexual abuse or prevention of childhood abuse, I was a fan of Carrot. So yes, no, I swear to God, before I ever started this position, I was following Carrot's Instagram.
Oh, that is funny. I get stopped all the time in stores, in boutiques, all of that. It's Carrot's.
If I saw you out, I would absolutely be one of those people who was like, oh, hi, Claire. Oh, hi, Erin. Like, I know your whole family from Carrot's
with 1,000 cat followers. I used to get stopped a lot for Erin's Law, but now I get stopped more because of the cat. But I'm telling you, the cat is allowing me to reach people with Erin's Law that would have never known about it. It's why that the cat's thing just continues to grow.
I love it. If you can hook me with a cat or a dog, really, and I'm immediately in. So you're doing an amazing job.
Sounds good.
We're super excited. Do you want to give us a little intro about yourself? Tell us quick little what you've done, what your purpose is with Erin's Law.
Yeah, so for the last 14 years, I have been going across America passing Erin's Law, which requires personal body safety education taught kindergarten, some states it's pre-K to 12th grade, on teaching kids how to speak up and tell if they've been sexually abused, the differences between safe and unsafe touch, safe and unsafe secrets, basically giving kids the education I never got as a kid, and so many kids across this world are failed to be taught about. So I made it my mission in my home state of Illinois to get it passed. And then I realized this is a worldly epidemic, so why not take it state to state? So I quit my master's level job as a counselor working with youth and began writing legislators in all 50 states. And here we are, 14 years later, the 38th state just signed it in Ohio. And I'm also taking it international, which is amazing.
That's amazing. Where do you have any specific places right now that you're working with internationally?
So I had a judge recently in Kerala, India, hear about my law because it was such an issue. He was seeing such a high rate of youth being abused that he's like, this needs to be fixed. And he stumbled upon my law and he took it upon himself to require it starting next year. The way the government is set there's 28 states in India, and the way it is set up, the judges can put a requirement on education. And he is requiring, starting next year, all schools must teach my law, which I think is amazing. I would have never thought to put India as the top of my list to reach out to. I thought maybe that'd be a harder, country to get it in. And then in 2015, I flew to Canada and spoke there. And a man in the audience is a board member for the organization I spoke for and told the executive director, if I ever run for office, I will introduce Erin's Law here. Well, just last week, he reached out to me and he just got elected a few months ago into office in Ontario. And he said, Erin, I'm introducing it. Would you come here and speak to all our legislators? He said the head of education in Ontario, their province, kind of like in the States, it's, the Department of Education, and then it goes on to the governor. The person that would be considered in Department of Ed is in 100% support of the students being taught this, which is amazing because that's an issue I run into in a lot of states in America. State Board of Ed does not want this taught, does not want to be told, here's another mandate, here's something else you have to do. But I'm sorry, teaching kids how to speak up and tell and stopping predators from abusing children is worth giving up a music class, an art class for 1 week. 1 hour is all I ask for. I think we can afford that to put a predator behind bars and keep them from hurting anybody else.
Absolutely. Congratulations. That is like such a big win.
Yes, it's really cool. And now that it's going international, I'm pointing out to these remaining 12 states, look what has happened in 38 states and what is now going into other countries, and you're still failing to introduce this bill. What it goes to show, where they stand on their politics, and obviously protecting kids is not a priority.
Yeah, which breaks our heart. Melissa actually gets to go into the classrooms because of Erin's Law and does some of the education. As you're talking about, I'm like, yep, Melissa teaches that one, Melissa teaches that one, Melissa teaches that one. We actually have 3 preventionists here who have only been allowed into the schools because of Erin's Law. So like it helps the kiddos, but we have jobs because of you.
Yeah, so thank you. And it gives us an in to really like empower the caregivers. So whether that's the parents or caregivers, the families of the students, and then you have the educators, the administration, which we run into some issues with the administration. But
what kind of issues do you run into? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's the touching rule. What we'll end up doing is we'll do the swimsuit rule. And then I'm like, I highly encourage you to send this family letter and home link home because we do second step child protection unit. And so I basically just really highly encourage them to send that home link for lesson 4 touching rule home with a family letter attached to it that says, this is how we taught your child today with the swimsuit rule. And this is what that rule is. The next page is a resource for you to continue the conversation if you wish. The kids are able to say, no, don't touch my penis, vulva, whatever it is, because we know that it's a lot more powerful. And says to the predator, the kid has learned the names of their private body parts, and they have a trusted, like they can go tell and use that name, like, and they can't be tricked. And so they're going to move on. Empowering them, giving them a tool to use so that they can start teaching the names of the private body parts so that.
Well, and all point out, these parents that don't correct their kids when they're calling it a PP or this or that, that's very damaging because if you don't teach kids the correct body parts, say that child ends up getting abused, say they sit down for the forensic interview and the forensic interviewer is interviewing the child and the child says, he touched my pee-pee. Well, in court, you can make the argument, the defense attorney saying, I didn't say penis, this kid is saying a pee-pee. How do we know what a pee-pee is? And just totally, the kid is not using the correct terminology. That could damage the entire case. And names of this stuff is just crazy. They can make your pee-pees, your ear, your feet, and so that's why it's so crucial that we teach kids the correct terminology of it.
Yeah. And I think too, the administration sometimes will be like, I've heard from a few families already. And, and like, that's their job to be going in between and communicating, the standards of education and everything. But I know, like, for sure, Illinois, I think of the scope and sequence of Erin's Law, it says something about the swimsuit rule.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, an acceptable, type of teaching
Yep.
that'll
Modification.
fulfill the mandate. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, do you guys see, and I ask this often, parents calling concerned, I mean, I ask a lot of schools this, and I'm always told we might have one or two parents call wanting to know what their child is being taught, want to see the curriculum.
Yeah.
Or I did a whole school assembly once, and a parent did not want their child sitting through it because she had been sexually abused and she thought hearing me speak would be traumatizing. I totally get it.
Yes.
But yet I hear often parents want to know what is being taught. And then once they understand what's being taught, they're okay with it. Because there's this fear, especially in society now with this comprehensive sex ed, that Erin's Law is really teaching kids about you could choose any identity you want to be, a boy, a girl, and parents freak out about that. And so it really now having to clarify to parents, no, this is personal body safety and personal body safety only. This is to help give your kids a voice if they're being abused, to report it, because without it, abusers threaten kids and kids won't tell.
Yes.
Yeah, Erin, I'm lucky enough. I do a lot of work at the college campus here, and I was teaching 2 classes yesterday for early childhood educators. And I actually said almost those exact same things because I'm like, hey, guess what? I'm going to be on podcast with Erin from Erin's Law tomorrow. And they were all like, oh, wow, and then we had the discussion about why it's important, and I'm sure they'll all be listening. So shout out to Jill's classes at the community college.
Nice.
Yeah.
And we do have one school in particular that the social worker is really, like, she tells me about some of the calls she gets. And sometimes it's just understanding, the family understanding what's being taught, like you said. And then that's fine. And there's a couple of families who are like, no, our kid's not going to be in that class. We'll teach how we wish to teach it at home. And so they're pulled from class, like opted out. And so it does happen. However, what's really cool is that over the years, like now she lets like the parent lets one of the kids come into like 1 or 2 classes because she knows what those objectives are, but not the other 3. So they're slowly stepping in and understanding more about it, which is heartening to me and hopeful. So I mean, like, I'll take that as a win. I was like, wow, you, like, the social worker really working with that family, like, made a huge difference.
Oh yeah. And I've actually like to use the example of the mom that reached out to me. Her letter was pretty powerful. She said how the letter came home for Erin's Law being taught next week. And she had concerns. She wanted to know what her kid was being taught. She, was afraid. And she said to me, and I've been talking to my kids for years about personal body safety, that you come to me if anyone touches, inappropriately. And so I was really worried what, agenda the school had and what they were going to teach my first grader, if it was age appropriate. So she reached out to the principal, got the materials, was still very unsure if she was going to let her daughter participate. And so she goes, it wasn't until the night before the class was being taught that she didn't sign the form saying she had to be pulled and sit in the library while the rest of her classmates. She decided to go forth and let her daughter, listen to it. Well, what happens? That child ended up disclosing at school. DCFS got involved. This girl disclosed that Grandpa, Mom's father, has been molesting her for years. Mom, who came to me and said, I thought I had educated my daughter on this. Why didn't she come to me and tell me this? And as I pointed out to her, and I pointed to other parents, often in these cases, a child is being threatened, and those threats can be, I'm going to harm mommy, I'm going to kill mommy. So a kid is being told, if I tell mommy this, mommy's going to be harmed. I have to keep this a secret. Sometimes it takes that outside educator giving kids that same message mom's been giving to suddenly open up and give them the courage to disclose. And as she saw, it took that outside person teaching personal body safety to get this kid to finally come forward. And, like she said, I never in a million years would have assumed my own dad would be doing this to his granddaughter. So I use that all the time.
That's very powerful. And if you don't mind, we may steal that example.
Go right ahead.
I'll be like, this is from the mouth of Erin of Erin's Law.
Yeah.
Yes.
They have to take it seriously, right?
Yeah. I try to tell parents, and don't be, as this mom said, she goes, I just assumed she'd come to me. And I said, don't feel guilty. Like, why couldn't my kid come to me? This is the power predators have over children. And just be glad that they went to somebody. They reported to some other safe adults that they realized, okay, I can't tell my mom this, but there's this other safe adult that I can tell this to. I'm just so grateful that she made that decision, because that grandfather would still probably be abusing her.
Yeah, or other kids in the family as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't if they're getting away with it.
I mean, nobody, like, in regards to whatever thing, like, you're not going to stop if nobody knows that you're doing something wrong.
Exactly. And both my cases, my predators, one was the adult neighbor down the street, lived with my best friend. The other was a relative. And in both cases, they were molesting more than one child.
I feel like that's one of the things when I'm, teaching adults about Erin's Law and sexual abuse prevention and everything, and I share that information, that usually it's multiple children who are experiencing the abuse. So when one finally has a safe space to disclose that, they're actually helping additional children and potentially future children from being abused.
Oh, yes. And I tell kids that, I said, by coming forward, you're saving the lives of so many other kids that, could be abused by this same person. You're putting a stop to what this monster has done.
Yeah, I have several adult women in my family who experienced abuse at a young age. Had they had something like Erin's Law in place, that may not have happened to them, or at least there was an intervention early on. And they didn't get that, they're in their 60s now. It just wasn't around during their childhood.
Oh, it's so sad. And I hear it all the time. I wish I would have had this 20, 30 years ago. But I didn't. Spent 4 years, 6 years, 10 years being abused.
Yeah. And like, you don't need to know the outcomes. You're aware of how terribly that can affect an individual as well as the whole family.
Oh, yes. Especially when the perpetrator is in the family. It's so sad how this just destroys families. It just tears families apart. But so often, it is someone in the family, or 90% of the time, someone the child knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody likes hearing that either.
That's right. I was going to bring that up, Erin. In the classroom, when I start talking about health and safety and trying to put it in terms of that with the kids, and then they bring up like, oh, one of the, like, we do never rules, and we could tie it into like never play with fire, never touch guns, and then eventually we're getting into always ask first, and then we're getting into a safe and unsafe and unwanted touch, and then we go into the touching rule and never keep secrets about touching. And so they start saying, oh, and stranger danger, like don't talk to strangers, and you gotta laugh. Like it's somebody, most likely it's going to be somebody they know. And I actually got to do a training with some parents and caregivers about all of this too, of like, and this is preschool parents, and when I said like it's most likely going to be somebody the kid knows, like their eyes just like bug out of their heads, because they're like, they're thinking about stranger danger. And it's like you said, 90% of the time it's not gonna be a stranger.
Yes, the strangers are the stories you hear about in the national media, and they're rare.
I think the 90s, 80s, 90s kids, which I think we're all a part of that generation, that's what we
Yep.
heard was the van without windows. Don't take
Yes.
candy from a stranger. And like, I have never been offered candy or anything like that in my life. And I was running around the block nobody was keeping an eye on me. I had a lot of opportunities to be approached by a stranger and never had been.
Yes, yes. Well, and I give an example to legislators of a time that I was having a lemonade stand when I was 12. My 10-year-old friend was with me. We saw this almost like the video. The white truck sitting in the parking lot near my house. These two guys observing us for quite a while. Finally, they pull up to our lemonade stand and they put their hand out with a whole bunch of change, tons of quarters, nickels, dimes. We don't want any lemonade. Here you go. And immediately my is going to the video of the guy putting his hand out, the stranger with the candy. And I thought to myself, looking back on this, I was educated on this. I knew to say no. I said, take your money. I don't want it. No, I don't want it. And because I was educated, being abused by somebody I knew, two people I knew, I didn't know that education because school never taught me it.
Yeah. You got these really powerful stories and examples. Man, we're going to have to like play these video clips to administrators and parents and be like, see, we told you the truth.
Yeah. Well, and so we had mentioned that, often the perpetrator is going to have multiple victims. And I wanted to mention too, like, is it common for someone to be abused by multiple people? And I know in your own story, you've been abused by multiple people. And so,
what the reality is statistics show if a child has been abused once, they're at a higher risk of being abused again. Vulnerable. And it also depends on the environment they're in. Of course, the more things kids are involved with, often you see the perpetrators being coaches, youth pastors, so kids in, youth involved activities in the church, as I said, family members, kids that go away to youth camp. There's just so many scenarios of people you trust and think your kids are safe with. Puts the kid at a higher risk than, and like I say, parents can't put their kids in a bubble. I'm not saying don't trust anyone with your children. I'm just teaching them the proper known grooming that predators do so kids can speak up before abuse even begins. And, reporting it once it happens. And it's shocking to me, when I speak at places, hearing people come up to me afterwards, particularly grown men, coming up to me afterwards saying that, they've never told a soul and they were sexually abused and here they are in their 50s, not even told their wives. And the perpetrators, who did this, for one, it was the camp counselor. In just listening to this guy, how this has destroyed him and eaten away at him his whole life. And he kept saying to me, I don't know why I'm telling you this right now, but listening to you just made me come up and just, share all this. And he was almost ashamed as he kept talking. I'm like, no, this is amazing that you're finally letting the secret out and letting it be known, I said. And, the next step I encourage you to take is to tell your wife, to start there. Because, this is something that you've been keeping from her for 30 years they've been together. And so, but it's just powerful to see people that come forward after carrying this for decades. And for men in particular, it's a lot harder to come forward than women. There's a greater amount of shame, with the 1 in 6 boys that this happens to.
Yeah. And that makes me think about, what was the Me Too movement like for you, Erin?
Well, it put a lot of spotlight on the issue that I've been trying to draw national attention for over and over and over again. So it really just helped continue to get my message out there on what I am trying to do. And I did tons of media interviews, really putting it out there, putting awareness on Erin's Law, what it is doing. I'm even getting people where it's not passed in their state, or reaching out to their principals, superintendents, and getting their principals to go, oh, yes, we should be teaching this, and teaching it without being, a law that's being required to do it.
that is amazing.
It's
I
all
wish we could send like gift baskets to all of those folks who are like something like you're
Yes.
going above and beyond to make sure that your school is preparing kids and looking out for them,
exactly.
which is
Yep.
what schools are supposed to be doing. Like, yes, the education piece, of course, but like it needs to be their safe space.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
13%, I think, of a child's life is spent in the school. And
Oh,
like,
wow. Okay.
yeah, so it's like, of course, yeah, we need to have these in place because also, right, there are teachers, there are school staff who could be having inappropriate relationships with their students, and it happens. So
Well,
it's
let me give you an example of that. 8 years legislators killed my law in New York,
okay.
year after year. And I kept coming back, kept coming and testifying, kept making calls to the media and telling these legislators, one day I will bring you the proof, like I have seen in other states, of why I never gave up on pestering you to pass this law. There are kids right now being abused, and by preventing this bill from being passed, you were allowing these monsters to continue to silence and molest these kids. Finally, the woman in control that kept killing my bill from getting passed for 8 years stepped down from being the chair of Education Committee in the Assembly in New York. New guy came in, totally supported it, ended up getting it passed in 2019. Very first year it was taught was in the 2020-2021 school year. And an agency went into an elementary school in upstate New York to teach Erin's Law. And the very first time they walked into the school and taught it, 9 kids came forward saying they were being abused by the end of the day. These 9 children were all pointing the finger at the same individual, the principal. The principal created a Lunch Buddies program. And for the last 17 years working as the principal in this school, had all his victims' boys come down and have lunch with him while he locked the door and molested them, silenced them. Often perpetrators gave their kids toys. He had the drawer full of all the little trinkets, and literally sexually abused dozens after this came up. We had 17, 18, 19-year-olds, young adult men coming forward saying he molested me weekly through elementary school. That's the kind of power this man had over silencing these kids. And what is even more amazing, when his trial happened, there were teachers that got on the stand saying they saw that he was acting inappropriate with students. One teacher even recorded on her phone how he was touching a kid and the boy in the hallways, and it just was inappropriate. Yet all these teachers, who I believe should be fired and aren't, were saying they didn't tell because they were threatened that they would lose their job. So these teachers put their career before protecting children, which disgusts me. And while the principal was convicted in November and sentenced to 62 years in prison, every single one of those teachers, those secretaries that watched those boys constantly being marched into to have lunch with the principal, never girls. And the secretaries will tell you that, the vice principal, yeah, it was never girls. Didn't you find that odd? That you were just interested in the boys? It makes me sick. I totally feel all the educators that saw this inappropriate behavior, saw the red flags, should lose their jobs at a minimum for just, helping to destroy these kids' lives by not doing the right thing. A total of 26 victims came forward, and this man had been doing this for decades.
And that's just way more than 26.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God. Probably at least 100 over 17 years for sure.
And they have, I don't know what the mandated reporting laws are in New York, but I mean, it's a misdemeanor felony in Illinois if you suspect child abuse and do not report it. So like,
yes. Mm-hmm. There's
that's
a big
caregiver role, so that is DCFS call.
Well, yeah,
yes,
whatever child protective services that state it has, but yeah.
Yep.
Man, these are very powerful examples. I know, how often would you say kids are disclosing after the presentations in our counties, Melissa? Like, I know I'm asking you.
it varies really. And it depends like what day of the presentation and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, usually about once, at least one time while we're at a school, we're getting somebody, if not more than that. So, I mean, and sometimes kids are just asking questions and more like hypotheticals too. And I know, like, I was at a school recently and it was a seventh grade class, and a student came up to me and shared, like, hypothetically, this is what's going on. And 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 I said, well, hypothetically, and I like gave a response. And they didn't go on further. They just kind of stood there, took it in, and then said, okay, I'm gonna go now. And so it's just one of those things too. So I think sometimes they present hypotheticals, or like, well, my friend's going through this or something like that. And so those are things to look out for too.
I've had situations where I've talked at school assemblies, and I was at a middle school once and told the kids, if this is happening, come forward. There's people here to talk to you. And I always get a whole stream of kids just coming up wanting to talk to me, ask me questions. But then I get those disclosures, and I'll never forget this one elementary school. 2 girls came forward and said, this isn't happening to us. This is happening to our best friend. Because I shared that in my message to the students. I said, this might not be happening to you, but it's happening to your best friend, and they've been telling you to keep this a secret. I told another cousin on my other side of the family that my cousin was abusing me. I told my best friend that he was doing this to me, but I made them all pinky promise they would not tell anybody. And what did they do? Kept it a secret. So I said, this might be happening to someone you know. Don't keep it a secret. You might fear they'll never be your friend again. I can guarantee you that won't be the case. They might be mad for a while, but in the end, they'll one day thank you for putting an end to their abuse and you helping protect other children. So these 2 girls came forward saying, this is happening to our best friend. Her dad is doing it to her. She was crying during the assembly. What do we do? And the guidance counselor sits next to me and goes, oh boy, I got a lot of work to do. And it was a Friday. And I now suggest schools don't hold assemblies or lessons on Fridays. Start the week off with it, because if you get disclosures at 2:45 on a Friday after someone like me has come in and spoke about it, you have a mess on your hands going into the weekend. Do it part of the week in case you get disclosures.
That's a really, really smart suggestion, because particularly for the staff, once they receive a disclosure, there's all the paperwork and all of the different tasks now they need to complete. So yeah, that's really smart to act like, no, don't screw yourself up on your Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Well, and if it's a family member who's in the home, who's doing the abuse, and then like you get that disclosure on, like you said, 2:45 on a Friday, like you are, booking it to call DCFS. Somehow they're going to have to halt, like them getting on the bus. You got to hold them at school. Like it's a whole thing. And so, yeah, I think your wisdom needs to be listened to.
If DCFS doesn't get involved quick enough, sadly, there are oftentimes mom protects stepdad, biological dad, mom's boyfriend over the child. And all of a sudden, DCFS shows up the next day, that Saturday, to interview the child or intervene, or even the kid goes home for a few hours and mom finds this out. I can't tell you how many times kids recant because they've been threatened. We'll be thrown on the streets. We'll be homeless. We can't survive without your dad. Look what you've done. So the kid completely recants what they've disclosed. So you have to get DCFS, law enforcement involved before the child can get sent back home.
Yeah. That's something I as not being there doing the actual Erin's Law education in the K-12 classrooms, that makes total sense, but I probably wouldn't have thought about that ahead of time. Yeah. So before we finish up, Melissa, is there anything that you specifically wanted to talk to Erin about? So I don't want to keep Erin on too long.
Right. So we've had some examples of like why some states might not adopt Erin's Law? Like, are there any other reasons why they are not adopting your law? Because it seems like common sense to me. This is just like part of raising our kids, and so I just want to hear about that.
So some of the biggest issues I run into is one is funding. These schools say, great, but this is an unfunded mandate. I have really been able to get past that in most states now. It's not becoming so much an issue in some states, but it's not so much because I'm finding federal funding under the federal bill, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was an Erin's Law bill written into this. President Obama signed it. So there is some federal dollars, but some argue, well, those federal dollars are also used for DARE, stranger danger, bully intervention, internet safety, suicide prevention. So it's not just Erin's Law, but there are programs that cost minimal. There are outside agencies that will go in and do this, that have grants that fund it. So I've been able to bring that issue to the forefront. That used to be a big hurdle for me, was the unfunded mandate. The other big issue is these schools, school boards, superintendents and legislators in very conservative states not understanding what Erin's Law is doing. They think that this is sex ed, that we're teaching first graders about abortion, safe sex, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, this is personal body safety. Read the bill, read the language. And so a lot of these conservative states don't want to touch an issue that has the word sexual, sex, any of that. They're just, they're living decades before, centuries before, of not addressing this issue. So that's something in a lot of the states remaining of the 12 that have not passed it are conservative states. I mean, we've got Florida and Idaho that never have even written a bill introducing it. Like Wisconsin, it's been introduced 8 times, but it's never really moved. Or some of these other states, Kentucky, I've testified in a few times, but it just hasn't gotten to the point of the final passage and getting signed. And like states like Idaho, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, there's like little to zero movement, not even written up, introduced, because of how conservative these states are. So that's been a really big issue I have had. And some of them say legislators are against it because they say we shouldn't be telling schools what to do. This should be left up to local control. And so that's something else I run into.
Gotcha. Another question I had was, what kinds of things should parents and caregivers look out for as red flags that a child's being abused, so that our listeners can hear that here?
Yes. So something I often say is, as I mentioned, it's often someone they trust that is abusing them. Well, that child that is being abused by someone they trust obviously does not want to be around them anymore. If you suddenly see that kid not wanting to do the sport they used to love, that should raise some red flags. What's going on? That could be because the coach is abusing them. Not saying that's the case, but I would investigate and look into that. Same with all of a sudden the kid that loved Uncle Johnny and suddenly doesn't want to go do sleepovers at their aunt and uncle's, doesn't want to be by that person, doesn't want to go to overnights at little Sarah's house anymore and used to love doing it. These are red flags to look for. The kid that suddenly is wetting the bed, suddenly showing signs of aggression, sexually acting out in ways they shouldn't, knowing sexual terms that is, not known for that age of a child, self-harm. A lot of kids go through weight loss or weight gain. A child will often wear layers and layers of clothes to make it difficult for the perpetrator to have access to abusing that. So that kid that is suddenly dressing different. There's a list right on my website on erinslaw.org of a whole bunch of warning signs to look for in a child. Their grades changing. A child that was once an A-B student is suddenly going a C-D. You got the school calling saying they have concerns that their happy child is suddenly very withdrawn, depressed, crying, not wanting to leave the home. A child that's being abused, there are definitely warning signs to look for. And in my case, I had all the warning signs,
Yeah.
both as a both as a 6 to 8.5-year-old, and then to an 11 to 13-year-old. There were red flags all there. It was identified. School put in a plan for me, an IEP. They labeled me a behavior and emotionally disturbed child. I put my hand through a window. I was screaming I was being abused without actually saying it. And yet nobody was getting to the root of why I was having so many behavior problems. They even made me repeat first grade because of so many issues I was having. No one was getting to the root of why I was behaving this way.
Thank you for sharing that, Erin.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's going to be helpful for teachers and caregivers. And one interview I had seen, what sort of elicited you talking to your parents was it your sister said so-and-so's gross?
Yes. So as I mentioned, they're often abusing somebody else if they're getting away with it. And one day, my little sister blurted out the words, "Brian's gross." And I just stopped in the street and looked at her and said, "He's doing it to you too?" And I just was stunned and shocked. And all of a sudden, just all this anger filled me. Like, here I'm quiet and you're doing it to my little sister. So that is what gave me the courage to come forward and tell, because suddenly I had somebody else saying he was doing this. He couldn't threaten me and be like, "Nobody will believe you," because if it's 2 against 1, someone's got to believe us. And that's what gave us the courage to tell my parents the next day.
Wow.
It's terrible that you were experiencing the abuse, but I love that you and your sister together were able to approach this. And I think it's pretty common for a lot of us. We're not going to speak up for ourselves. But when it comes to someone that we care about, like it was your little sister, so your big sister, you're her protector, you're like, well, now we have to talk about it because I can't let this happen to you.
I remember so much about that day, sitting there on our telling her, "Old, this is going to change our family forever. We're not going to be like this anymore. Having dinners twice a week, spending 3 days after school, always stopping at our aunt and uncle's on the walk home." Like, all these things crossed my mind of, warning her how much it's going to change. And then that night when we were home, I kept looking at the top of the stairs down at my mom, on the phone with one of her girlfriends, sitting there doing things, seeing her so happy, talking about something so exciting to her friend that was happening in her life, and realizing, oh my gosh, I am about to tell her this crushing, horrible news that is going to change her life tomorrow. And it was just this dreading feeling of just like, and something a lot of kids do is not wanting to hurt their parents, not wanting to see their parents upset. And that was something actually in my life when I came forward and said what our cousin was doing. I was so afraid to tell my mom what happened when I was 6, 7, and 8, because she was so distraught when she found out what was going on right under her own nose at Thanksgiving, Christmas, dinners over there, all these times that there was no way I could tell her, "Well, Mom, Brian wasn't the only one," because I thought it would kill her. I thought she'd go over the deep end, which is why I didn't wait till adulthood to eventually disclose to her. But once again, it's one of those situations. I was fortunate to find out this man was not doing it to anybody else, but he easily could have. And I should have, looking back, spoken up back then. And the one question I wish the interviewers asked me, which they do now across the country with these children's advocacy centers, was when I was being interviewed, "Has anyone else ever touched you the same way your cousin has touched you?" I feel like if that question would have been asked in that moment, that vulnerable moment, I was talking all about this, it might have come out. But it didn't come out till, more than a decade later.
Yeah. I often will tell parents and caregivers when we're talking about these parent educator, nights, kids they do try to protect their parents, even when we don't want them to. So when you do receive a disclosure, try and keep a neutral face. Try not to look angry, even though, of course, you're going to be angry inside. And to give the kids some power back. Say, this is what we're going to do next. I want to do this. We're going to get you in counseling. We're going to call protective service, whatever, so that the kid feels they have some control over the situation for the first time.
Yes, exactly. And I even tell principals, teachers, when a child does disclose, because often it will happen in school after an Aaron's Law, to empower the kids, tell them they're very brave. You did the right thing. Don't freak out. Don't be calling the police in front of them or DCFS or making a scene with other teachers, principals. And the number one thing I always tell principals and educators, do not call home. You call DCFS first. You do all these other protocols before you get the parents alerted, especially if the perpetrator's in the home. You are going to, or if it's a family member, you are going to have that mom react in anger and suddenly confront the abuser. Suddenly, uncle, grandfather is getting in the car and just fleeing and taking off, because of, this all coming out before law enforcement could go do a little knock on the door and confront him and catch him off guard.
Yeah. It's hard. Like I would be obviously livid inside and like trying to manage that so that the appropriate actions are taken so we can protect more children and take good care of this victim or survivor. But yeah, it is hard. And as a parent, you want to rage.
Yes.
One of the last questions is, how do we stop child sexual abuse before it happens? So like pure prevention of it. And I think a lot of it is what you've put into Erin's Law, right? Like teaching kids about their body and body safety, empowering them to be able to understand that they can stand up to adults and say no. And they can stick up to even people they consider friends, like their peers, and say no, and family members. So is there anything else that you want to say about like the prevention of child sexual abuse?
Something I like to point out with talking to kids about this is grooming. Telling kids, well, maybe somebody hasn't violated you in your private areas. You are the boss of your body. If you don't want to give hugs, sit on someone's lap, all these different situations. I tell parents, don't force your kids to hug their grandparents. Let them make that decision. But I tell kids they need, parents, educators need to teach kids the grooming of an example I can quickly give you is I posted about 6 months ago on my Erin's Law Facebook page a picture of the house I was abused in from 6 to 8. It looks like just any other ordinary home in a neighborhood, and anyone driving by would think nothing of it. As I was pointing out, abuse can be going on in your own backyard, in the house right next door, and nobody has any idea. And in this house, nobody knew the horrors of what I endured and what had gone on. And when I had posted this, I said, for some people, that's a school, that's a church, different locations and places. Well, I got a private message from a girl saying, Erin, I've been following you for 8 years. I'm a teacher teaching your law in my school in Illinois. And I know that house that you just posted. And I know the monster that you're describing. She went on to get on the phone with me, and we went back and forth, and she told me how my best friend's uncle, after I had moved away and gotten away from him, she moved into the neighborhood. She is suddenly now best friends, living in the same court with my friend, who it was her uncle that was a perpetrator. She is now in this home playing all the time. And suddenly, this uncle of hers, as I mentioned, multiple victims, starts grooming this child. She goes, he would play with my hair. Then he kept putting his hands on my shoulder. She goes, and I was like creeped out by like constantly trying to get away from this guy. And once again, she saw all these red flags in this uncomfortable situation she didn't like to be in. And she said, and the point that suddenly one time she's in one of the back bedrooms with her friend, the uncle appeared and pushed her up against a closet. And she immediately pushed him away, said, get away, and got herself out of the situation, and then was refusing to go back into the house and would continue to play with her friend, but would only play with her outside because she feared the uncle, who was the caretaker while mom was gone, doing something, because she saw this grooming behavior that made her uncomfortable. Did not, like I said, usually it starts with the touching, and they test your boundaries. It might start with touching your legs, your thighs, and it leads from one thing to the next. It continues to get more severe. So you got to teach kids the red flags. I don't like to be touched. doing that and getting themselves out of these situations, drawing attention to it if there's other adults, in the area. And so it was just crazy to me to see this girl, no idea who she was, and her describing to me this monster that she knew too, that I described to people all over the world that don't actually know who he is. And she knew exactly who this man was, and was a smart kid before ever being educated, never being educated, saw the grooming behavior and got out of that situation. Then our conversation leads to, well, if you graduated from the same high school a couple of years older than me, then you had to have known my cousin because he went to the same high school as me. I go, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to tell you who he is. I hope you weren't friends with him. So I finally tell her his name, and she writes me back and says, I was never a fan of that arrogant jerk. I'm like, girl, you have got amazing radar. Can you go give speeches to people on body language, on grooming behavior, on,
Yeah, her gut instincts were like, the sirens were going off. She's like, something is very wrong here.
Like, wow.
That is a great story, though, because that's something that we talk to kids. Like, if it feels icky, it's icky.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I say, listen to that gut feeling. If something does not feel right, it isn't right. Get yourself out of that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that in all these, any type, not just with child abuse, but just in any situation, if it feels sketchy, if it feels icky, all those negative feelings, don't remove yourself. There probably is something to be concerned about if you're feeling that way.
Exactly. Listen to the gut.
Yes. Erin, thank you so much. We were so excited to have you here. We are proud of you as if you are part of our own family because we're like, she's so amazing. She does this and this and this. So we cannot thank you enough for just all the work. And I know it's a lot of work, and sharing your story, which isn't always easy, I'm sure. So we very much appreciate you, Erin. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for helping to bring awareness to what I'm doing and all the work in the schools.
Yes.
Absolutely. And also thanks for being a good example of a parent and caregiver of kiddos. And you are teaching what you actually go out and talk about, So thank you for being a good example.
Thanks. I appreciate it, ladies. And keep going on doing the good work with the kids.
We will. We'll send you a link once we get it, so that you can listen to it. Yes, we would love if you shared it. I'm sure that will grow our listeners quite a bit. So thank you. Please give your little kitty a hug for me. I know she doesn't know me, but I was to tell you.
Hoping she wouldn't start scratching on the door because she wants in my lap, because she has done that before in interviews.
We would be excited. We'd be like, okay, please show us her face. Let's see that cute belly.
Yes.
I've literally had her walk across the computer screen. Baby to sleep, and now the cat is ruining the scene.
Everybody wants a piece of mom, right? Well, have a great day. I hope your afternoon session goes well too.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Erin. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. I hope you all absolutely loved the interview with Erin. Me and Melissa sure did. We will be talking about it for a long time. And we wanted to do our media that we love to be some of Erin's.
Yes. So we have Erin's book, An Unimaginable Act, Overcoming and Preventing Child Abuse Through Erin's Law. And this book is partially a story of her experiences and partially a resource guide. She shares resources that provide support for survivors and caregivers, and she also educates readers about warning signs we might see if a child is experiencing abuse and why Erin's Law is so important.
Yeah, and if you want to look at any of her other stuff, she has 2 other books. One is called Living for Today, From Incest and Molestation to Fearlessness and Forgiveness. And a third one, Stolen Innocence, Triumphing Over Childhood Broken by Abuse, a memoir. All of these are available on Amazon. And if you are looking to check out anything about her two kitties, Bailey and Carrot, she has a book for each of them up on Amazon as well. And I believe these are more focused just on, a cute book about cats, less about childhood abuse. You could also follow her Instagram, a cat called Carrot. I follow it. You will hear me talk about it because I'm a huge nerd. But yeah, her Instagram's great. These books are valuable and can really, I imagine, provide a bit of support for people who have experienced childhood abuse. And hearing her story, knowing they're not alone, right?
Yes.
That unfortunately this has happened to quite a few people. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for listening. Keep listening to hear about our support resources and how to contact us.
Look out for new podcasts every other Monday on anywhere that you can find your podcasts. Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Anchor FM, you name it. We're there. If you have any questions, and we would love to hear from you, you can email us at saferjourneyspod@safejourneysillinois.org. You can also message us on social media. We have a Facebook and an Instagram that you can find us at. And let's talk about some resources for anyone who's experiencing abuse. If you happen to live in and around LaSalle or Livingston County in Illinois, please feel free to call Safe Journeys support line at 815-673-1555. 24/7, confidential, services are free. If you don't happen to be in our area, there are 2 national hotlines that you can call for support. For sexual violence, you can call RAIN with 2 N's. That's the National Sexual Violence Hotline. Their phone number is 800-656-HOPE. They also have a live chat on their website if you're interested. And for domestic violence or intimate partner abuse, you can call the hotline, which is simply thehotline.org. This is our national domestic violence hotline, and you can give them a call at 800-799-SAFE or chat live on the website. Thanks for listening.